Welcome to MentorTime. I'm excited about this topic. It's interesting to be talking about topics that are small parts of us building up what we do, but become very important as we try to make sure that we keep attention to what we need to do for professional development. Just a reminder about going off video, change your name if you don't want your name seen. It's not going to be very visible, I can tell you, the way Zoom records now. So that's good news. Today, we're going to talk about consistency online and in person. What's the same? What's different? And we do have a question at the end. So I'm glad that this is one of our shorter presentations. First, though, let's do a little Slido poll. These are the 4 things I'm giving you as choices to why you think consistency is important or not. It's up to you. So if you've done Slido before and you have a phone or a tablet, you can use the QR code, or you can go to slido.com and put in the numbers 3267147, and I will do it too and vote on it. I hadn't thought about what I would vote on. All right. There we go. Okay. Thanks to those who were contributing. All right, so we're right now split between, a little bit of everything. Increasing visibility is dropping, building and increasing credibility, and distinguish yourself is dropping. It's great. There's no wrong answer, obviously. I just wanted to get your brains around why are we doing this and what's important. And for many of you who I've worked with but continue to work with, or I see others from others that I see in the course, many times we're at the stage of building and increasing our credibility. It's an interesting phenomenon over your time in your career that you think you've built it and then something happens in business, or you change your job, or you get a promotion, and then you feel sometimes like you're starting all over again. Or not all over, but you're having to build it. All right, so let's talk about, thank you. We've got build and increase credibility is really high up there, and then distinguishing yourself. Okay, here we go. My cursor, there we go. Now I've got 2 things. All right, so we're going to start with consistency in person and online. I'm going to give you a framework for it, and then look at what consistency gives you. And then we always end with, what does this mean for you? Meaning Sue's going to tell you what you should do. And actually, spoiler alert, I discovered doing this that I had some things I needed to do. All right, let's get started. Before I go into the actual content, I want to talk about 2 things. One is general background for you and a reminder, and one is late breaking news from LinkedIn a week ago, not even a week ago, that can affect visibility and credibility, and I wanted you to be aware of it. This is a slide many of you have seen. I talk about professional branding. The things that you control are your side of the conversation, the teal greenish color. And the rest is building what you've put out there. And you all said you want to build your credibility, increase your visibility, distinguish you from others. The part about LinkedIn that came out, this was an article that summed it up briefly. I heard last week all this in lives and in posts on, oh no, LinkedIn's reducing our visibility. And what has happened all along, ever since I joined LinkedIn, is LinkedIn used to be totally indexed by Google, including things like articles, the things you can write as a publication, which was great. You used to get a lot of visibility. But what they're doing now, as LinkedIn is pushing all of us towards buying premium memberships, which is a different question, although some of you have asked me about this, it's important to understand what this means. LinkedIn is blocking aspects of our profile. So much of it is not publicly available. That yellow line is the things that people used to be able to find. And these weren't just Sue going and doing a search where I would find your profile. This is third-party tools where they can scrape the data off of Google search without having to get into LinkedIn and buy Sales Navigator or the Recruiter module, whatever gives them, those folks, much more access. What's clear is LinkedIn's trying to put a lot behind the firewall without having many of us jump ship. Though there's no place to jump to, LinkedIn has become a monolith in many ways, similar to the big companies people want to work for. But be aware of it. Interestingly enough, last night or this morning, I can't remember when it was, I did my vanity search. And as always, I recommend this for those who've worked with me for the last several years. You should come up in your LinkedIn should come up in the first 10 results on a Google search on the first page. Mine came up in 2 places, and it picked up the top part. The top yellow is the line that is out of my About section, and the bottom one is actually my headline. So it's just a comment. Mine isn't blocked yet or whatever. It could be even cached information. That's the extent of my technology now. But just so you're aware of that, those will affect our visibility. It doesn't change what I'm going to go over with you. It's just to be aware of what LinkedIn is doing that may have impact on all of us, and you won't be the only one affected. I came up with these categories, not surprisingly, the things I talk about all the time in branding. And I have icons for each one. So let me take you through these in this order. The first 2, name and photo, are the 2 things that people know about you immediately. And I think we forget the power of names or the power of using different names, which is hard for me sometimes when I have course learners sign up on Teachable as one person and on the registration form as another person. Not a problem. I just have to figure out how to link them. So here we were back in 2004. And in those days, I thought we had to write our whole formal name. So I wrote it. LinkedIn didn't allow you to add degrees after your name. In fact, there was nowhere to add degrees at that point. So fast forward to 2015, I finally was pleased to see LinkedIn had a space they added. I think it was somewhere around 2015. But years ago, they added a space for you to put another name you were known by. And they used to call it maiden name. And I confirmed this yesterday. I looked in my 2018 or 2017 LinkedIn download I happened to do by chance. And the variable was titled maiden name. I put Brecken in there because for 20 years, including one person on this call, knew me as Sue Brecken, not as Sue Griffey. There are people who search for me and to this day will search saying, are you the Sue Brecken I met in Zambia, blah, blah, blah. And then last year, I changed what I wrote because finally, LinkedIn is letting us add stuff after our last name. It used to be you could put 1 or 2 last names, and now they let you put in your degrees. And I'm using it for all of you to signal to you, put your degrees in there, claim your credit, just like we do in the heading information. You don't go without your degrees. All right, so that's your name. Be consistent. And by the way, if you haven't done verification and you live in the United States, I don't know in what other countries it's available, but in the US, my official formal government name is Susan Jean Griffey. I got verified even though I submitted it because my LinkedIn profile said I'm Sue Griffey. I had no problem getting it cleared. So that was interesting. All right, headshots. Photos. Now, LinkedIn, I know when it started, it didn't have photos. And I didn't put one on. I don't remember when I did, but I'm showing you what I look like then, because the whole thing about photos is you need to be, when you appear in person or on video, you need to look like the person whose headshot you're using, whose headshot you're using. This was me in 2015 when I added Brecken back in my name. Now, this one I know because this is off my 2020 LinkedIn profile, and I had that headshot professionally taken. Then I had headshot. I found a photographer who would work with me on branding a couple times a year. So I had this done in 2022. I use it everywhere. It's on LinkedIn. It's on a lot of places. But I happened to realize we're talking about both in-person, online, real-time video, and my headshot. And I thought, I tell people all the time, you should update your headshot at least every 2 years. So I've got one to-do list already. But I think people mostly would recognize me when they meet me in person. I tested that out this year in a couple different places when I met person and people in real meetings in person. All right, the next area is your email address and your profile names. And this is important, not essential to always keep them the same, but I want to bring up the vagaries of what happens if you don't. I do know when I connect with people, I always check their contact information to see if they have an email there. There are still a lot of people that don't put an email in there, and you all can get a free Gmail that only goes to an account you never look at if you don't want people to contact you. But if you are going to put one in, make sure it's consistent. So you can see on the right-hand side, that's my email, my outgoing email from my suegriffey@gmail.com account. And that's the email I use on LinkedIn because I do a lot of mentoring, but I also have a lot of contacts beyond mentoring that know me and know the email is that. And then I went to look at Threads and Instagram and other places. I thought, where have I got introductions? So sorry, I'm still on names. So my Threads and my Instagram both are under Sue Griffey. Threads came from Insta, so that's not surprising. I'm Sue Griffey on Facebook, but I don't use that professionally, although I do keep the photo up to date. But what did I discover? When I looked at my Sue Mentors email, I discovered that I have my full old real government name there. And I thought, oh, there's something I have. So now I have two things on my to-do list: change my name in my signature block and put up, I actually have a new headshot that was done for me a few months ago. New category of titles, introductions. So asynchronous are those things that we leave trails around the internet. The ones on the left are the mobile version, and then the desktop version of my email, of my LinkedIn intro. Says exactly the same thing. Nothing was truncated on my phone. I was surprised to see. And Threads has a bio or a paragraph or whatever with it. Instagram doesn't. And they're close enough that you would know it's me. You would know, as I talked to a mentee last week, and I said, there's 8 of you on Facebook. I can't figure out from the tiny little thumbnail which one is you because I couldn't open them all. So, and she had an unusual name for us in the US maybe, but it wasn't unusual where she comes from. All right, so the other part of titles and intros are those that we use in audio and video when we're asked in the old days Clubhouse, now with LinkedIn audio, LinkedIn videos, with Zoom meetings like this one, where you introduce yourself. And I used Carly, who I was able to meet in person in July in Oregon. I always bring my pom-poms when I travel. Most of the time, the reactions from both sides are, oh, you're taller or you're shorter than we all expect. She knew who I was, and it wasn't that obvious. But I have seen some people who have old headshots on LinkedIn, and when I see them on video, they don't look at all like their old headshots. That's the right-hand side of in person. On the left is what I use for my standard introductions in the chat box, but also if I'm asked to introduce myself, such as I'm on Brenda Meller's VIP Job Seekers on the first Friday of every month. And she asks, there are several of us, she calls her all-stars. I use one of these introductions. I never have to worry about introducing myself. I know exactly what I'm going to say, and I just say that. I'm trying to get better about that. Difference between in person and in audio or video through the Ethernets that we're on. Not a lot of difference, but remember to be able to be found. I'm sure if I went to a conference, I'd take my pom-poms, and that would be maybe the only way people would recognize me. But think about that as we're doing more in-person meetings. And now the last is content. And there's two parts to this. What are you known for? So this is part of your reflected visibility. What do people already know about you? This is a list of the things I was asked to speak on in 2023, and I quickly categorized them by the ones that had more than one. The major topics, not surprisingly knowing me, are evidence-based results and networking, but it's networking without the capital networking that we all grew up with that I didn't like doing and I still don't love doing. But then the topics that I write about, things that I can put out and like these meetings, topics that are interesting to me, important in your whole professional development, because some of you may have been on the call a few weeks or a month or two ago where I talked about how to leave anything gracefully. That's a general topic that serves you well in professional development. So I talk a lot about other things, as you can see from the list there, that I'm probably among you all identified as, because Ron and I have worked with all of you in some fashion. Those are the categories of consistency. Not a lot of differences between in-person and virtual. But here's one caveat I will say across headshots, headlines, and introductions. I do get pushback from younger professionals who want to be clear. Now, remember, this is in the global world. I'm not talking about the US. In the global world, people who are newer professionals, or even not newer professionals, but in certain kinds of work, are saying to me, Sue, I am not going to use the same picture on Insta that I use and Facebook that I use on LinkedIn. And they've said to me, my boss expects me to look more formal, or the kind of work I do as a lawyer with people seeking asylum, I need to be much more formal, and it's got to be very distinctive. And that's the same differences, same or different. That's up to you, of course. You don't have to do it, but be aware, if you're careful about it, you can do consistency just on LinkedIn, and the rest of your life could be photos of you with pigtails instead and a jumper on or something. It could be very casual, and on LinkedIn you could still be found. It wouldn't be a problem. Just be aware of what you're doing and the opportunities you have if you want to make sure you're consistent everywhere. So what does consistency give you? It definitely gives you more visibility. So you go from being someone off in the distance to now they can see a lot of detail about you. It gives you efficiency when you're consistent, just like I told you about the introductions that I used to be horrible at. Now I know what I'm doing. This year, I decided I didn't like figuring out every day that we were having meetings like this or review meetings. What am I going to wear today from the waist up? So now I have 4 sweaters for the winter set aside. Okay, these are my branding colors, and in the summer, these are my 4 different colors. And they're not, surprisingly, they're parts of colors on this slide, definitely. I read teal, blue, pink, pinkish, purplish, pinkish, and reddish. All right, so it improves your branding because you know what you're putting out. You're putting out things that people have asked you for, as well as it increases your reputation because you're being consistent on a few key areas. It doesn't mean that because you say, like I say, I work with mentoring global professionals in transition. I also have a group of women in their 40s and 50s who are coming to me about planning their last decade and a half of working career. And they are in a transition, but slower and a different way of thinking about it. Just because I don't say that doesn't mean I don't do it. So you don't have to be recognized for every topic. And let me just mention that when I talk about being known for topics, that's not just Sue speaking. I don't write it much anymore. When I was working, I wrote reports, I wrote business proposals. The expertise that you have, the expertise that people come to you, whether it's people in the team you work in or people that you worked with, collaborators before, will say, oh, yes, we're going to see Ron because Ron can always tell us about the latest in learning and development. It's how and in what way are you using your expertise and using it consistently. All right, here's your part of it. What should you do? Check your consistency. So what's Sue going to give you? I'm going to give you a checklist, of course. I love checklists. I put together the 6 areas that I gave you a brief view of for each of these. What you should be doing and some extra little things like making sure you use name record, how you want your name pronounced. And then either a tip or a reason why you should be doing that, which we just went over everything there. So my 2 tasks are revise my name in my Sue Mentor's email signature and update my headshot. So stay tuned on LinkedIn and see if you won't be able to spot. Yeah, you could spot the email. I'll probably tell you that I've done it. All right, Ron, comments, questions, additions, anything I forgot? I probably did.
Oh, actually, just this idea of consistency is something that I've been wrestling with recently. Not quite on this, but it's to deal with professional presence. And I'm dealing with an organization, so there's it's similar enough, and it has to do with branding issues and the like, because ultimately, as you pointed out, that's what this is all about. What is your brand? And most of us in the professional world don't think in those terms. And until something happens, and then you said, oh, I've spoiled my reputation or something because I've done such and such. Anyhow, this idea of consistency, and it's just interesting that I'm dealing with that. And it's things like most of what I'm dealing with is print or graphics in nature. And so it's fonts. It's how do you use dates? How do you do this? So the consistency covers a lot of things. Like, in using dates, will I use the US format, the Canadian format, or the international format, etc. This is something that I have learned as Sue and I have worked together, is I have actually adjusted some of the ways that I thought I should do stuff in order to be more consistent with a particular idea. And so that becomes part of your brand, I think. And that's basically what I say. I endorse everything that I'm seeing here. It's a great advice. I really think so. It's a bit disappointing, but not surprising that LinkedIn is going to push folks a bit. But hey, everything's going for cash, and whether it's Netflix or whatever. So yeah, thanks, Sue.
Great. Anybody else have any comments or thoughts on this or questions?
I had a question so you listed out what you're asked to talk about and use that to determine what names you were going to pull to list for LinkedIn or topic areas. What would you suggest for those of us who maybe in the last few years, especially since COVID, have not necessarily been presenting a lot? Should we go to our resume and look for certain keywords? What do you suggest?
In terms of branding, Stephanie, for you and others, it is what are you known for? For you, we've talked about this, and no surprise to some of you already know Stephanie. Stephanie was in the early Ebola response from CDC and has done a lot on Ebola, and then with new infectious diseases, monkeypox. Remember, it's not because of my speaking. That's all I do right now. It's the kinds of things you're writing, the publications you're doing. We talked a few weeks ago about the work you're doing on preparedness plans and making sure that things are ready to go and identifying the country resources that you've already built up there. So that's the kind of thing I think about for all of you who are working. Who are you working with? What are you recognized for? What do people come to you for contributions? When Peter was in the Caribbean, he worked a lot on health system strengthening across islands and in a regional fashion. What does a region do? So I'm putting Peter's words out there because he's here. So does that help you think about it? It's not so much speaking, just what you're already publishing, what you're known for, the things you would bring up in an annual review if you're trying to remind your boss, oh, by the way, I'm serving as a resource to a branch team that wants to make sure they mirror our preparedness plan. Ron, did you have comments?
Actually, I probably should have said it earlier, but this idea, what are you known for? And this is where you come out with, we're multi-channel people, some of us anyway. Sue, you tend to avoid Facebook for obvious reasons, but I'm present on Facebook. My presence on LinkedIn is probably less than, anyway, it's not as high as it is. So Facebook is a place where I spend a fair amount of time because of the kinds of people I'm working with. So the issue has to do with what are you known for? Facebook is a very dangerous environment because you could be known to be the jerk who, or you could be known for, etc. So there's all of that going on. And I want to be clear here is what you do in other social media eventually could reflect back on your professional career. And here you are, you're being looked at here. Don't think a prospective boss isn't going to say, I wonder if they've got a Facebook profile. Oh yeah, they do. Oh, look at this. Oh, wow. This person ever an angry person or whatever. So that's something to be aware of, is that your professional presence is bigger than LinkedIn. Your professional presence is all of your presence.
Yeah.
And so especially the other areas of social media where I'm just having fun. And so in fact, this is the business of whether you have a profile picture that's fun over here on Facebook and then more serious in LinkedIn. I was actually going to show you an illustration, but I couldn't find it. Anyhow, but that's the idea. So
Yeah.
just this idea of consistency in the professional world, you can mess up your career a little or a lot based on what you're doing over in some other social media platform.
Thanks for that reminder. Yeah, I'm a little looser on Threads. There's a little more politics that gets into my likes, mostly likes. So anybody else have any more comments before we go on to the question?
Thank you both.
You're welcome. All right, we are going on to the question. So I got this question from someone, and it's about references for people who are later in their career, and the people that were their supervisors have retired. This person says, what do you do when you arrive at a point in your career when many of your former longtime supervisors are retired, in terms of using them as a reference, she means, for previous work, especially if you end up in a situation where your answer to an interview question relates to that experience from years before, but is relevant to the job? And do you still use references do you just use references for people who are working? Let me get to my notes because I put in some notes here. All right. Interestingly enough, the job interview this person had, it came up from work she had done, whatever, a long time ago, let's say a decade ago. It may have been on the resume or maybe not, but it came up in the interview, such as how to do a specific program intervention. And I thought to myself, okay, what's the relevance? Even if it comes up in an interview, unless they told you in the interview they wanted to talk to the person who was your supervisor at the time, you may not need that reference, that referee for that particular thing. I was asking myself, what in the new work they're interviewing you for would this old work be relevant for? And then 2 ways to move forward. Always, if you have their contact information for your previous supervisor, and if you know they are going to want to talk to this person, I was trying to think, would I want to talk to Sue's supervisor from 15 years ago? Maybe, but I don't know why, because right now, the way things are, I was a program evaluator. Things have changed so much in evaluation. I'm not sure that would be helpful, but who knows? So if you still have their contact information, it's useful to get in touch with them and say, would you be a referee if they ask me for this? I don't contact referees until I know that the company hiring me wants this person to talk to this person. But here's the realistic situation. People who are retired don't check their email all the time, even if they gave you an email. Maybe change phone numbers. Now we all have our cell phones. So if they're not available, and if the company hiring wants you to have a reference for your older work because they want to know how it was when you first worked in COVID or something like that, I don't know. If they aren't available, I'm sure that you could identify someone else in your organization who's at your level, maybe even junior, who remembers the time from years ago in terms of old work. Or you frame it as, that old work now looks like this in the new work I'm already doing that I could bring to you. So let me stop there and see if Ron has other thoughts on that. That's what I came up with.
Yeah, one is it may not be quite, this is about longtime supervisors and so on. It occurred to me that you could have a similar situation happening in a recent position where the supervisors moved on or retired or gone to Antarctica or someplace. And that could be within the sphere that you're dealing with. So that can still be a challenge, even more in jobs that are actually quite relevant to a particular position and quite current. So that does create a challenge. And I think the answer you gave is it's a good idea to have other folks that you can call upon who remember the kind of work that you were doing there and offer up a confirmation of whatever that they can. Just bearing in mind what are these referees allowed to do anymore. And in certain jurisdictions, I think in the United States, it's becoming very difficult.
Yeah.
In Canada, the rules are probably a little more open because I have been a referee for someone who was being hired and I told the truth and he got hired anyway. So I wasn't supposed to say that.
All right. We can't even say that in the US if you're an official employee. If the person wants to unmute and ask a question, I'm fine with that. If not, you can always reach out to me separately if there's something else you need on this answer. Does anybody in our group who's here today, anybody have any thoughts beyond what Ron and I thought about in terms of your advice?
It's interesting when you just said people in your peer group, if even a current supervisor may be retiring or leaving, because a colleague of mine said that was what she was about to do, that she had 7 references and a lot of them ended up being peer references. So I had never thought about it that way until both of you just mentioned that. It's a different approach, but getting people to still speak to your work. So thanks for that addition as well.
I'm glad that was helpful. Anyone else?
Hey Sue, Peter here.
Hey.
So I like so many other things, I guess it depends on the person. You might say you and Ron are retired, but you're also still quite active in doing things. And so for you, it would make sense, but somebody that's retired and is just working on, making sculptures in their shed or something, that might be a little less relevant. So I would still use somebody as long as I knew that they were active and would respond to emails is what I would think.
I think that's a good point, Peter. That's why when you get a question like this, I try to answer it with what I know rather than wait until we get here because I want to make sure that I can respond to people. But what I've also become aware of, and Stephanie, you just said this, is there are a lot of sources of this, but until you are asked for references, don't give them. We've taken them off the CVs and resumes now so that you can figure out what is it they really, after an interview, what do they really need to know? Who do they need to talk to? I have served as a reference on occasion for people that I've worked with, even in the mentoring situation, if I've worked with someone long enough that they show the characteristics of work so that I can, and I say, I knew this person in this way. I can speak to the characteristics, showing up on time, keeping me informed if there's a meeting they can't make, doing their assignment on time, being proactive about getting their needs met and what their goals are. I'm saying that, Stephanie, to give you a broader way of thinking through who's still at the agency if you wanted to use peers, or even people that you maybe didn't supervise but were working on teams with you who might be even junior to you, peers. And don't forget about people that you serve on boards with or people that you volunteer at organizations with who can also speak to those kinds of characteristics. Obviously, they aren't going to be able to speak to whether Sue's a good evaluator or not. All right. Any last comments?
Just as a reminder that some of us are approaching older times and the ultimate retirement is death. And this can happen too, is that the person you would want to have as my referee has got very ill or is really just not available. And that's It's just the reality. And so you always have to have a backup. And I think that's what Stephanie was saying, is that there are other ways of doing that.
That's a good reminder. We're all marching towards that. Yes, we are. All right, we'll leave this on a positive note because you're going to close the meeting, Ron.
That was meant to be positive.
Yes, we positively are marching towards death, and we'll use peers.
Yeah, well, thank you, Sue, and the questions and the conversation around it, I think were useful. So thanks everyone for your contribution, and look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.